Hello, everybody. We're now getting geared up for our concert of December 2nd, post-Thanksgiving holiday. And it's an interesting program. I'd like to think they're all interesting, but they're interesting in different ways. The unifying message of this is we have compositions by three extremely important great composers, all of whom were wonderful instrumentalists. And I'll just name them. Beethoven, great pianist. Thelonious Monk, jazz icon of the 20th century, great pianist. Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus, not only a great pianist, but a violinist as well, and a violist. So that's one common thread for this program. The other one is, it's very interesting how composers repurpose music that they have written into new forms. I think the act of writing a piece, no matter how brilliant and great you are, always drains you and until you're ready with energy to go on to the next piece. Sometimes in life, there are reasons why you want to repurpose a piece that you've written. And particularly in this program about Beethoven and Mozart, that's precise and explicit. So we'll start with Beethoven. Famously born in 1770 and died in 1827. Born in Bonn, Germany, lived mostly in Vienna, and first known as a great pianist. And then spread out his adventures into symphonies, into chamber music, into sonatas with other instruments. I, as a cellist, am particularly lucky to have 8 works by him written for cello and piano, and that's another story we're not dealing with tonight. But what we're starting with now is that in his early years, he wrote a piece called the septet, which is for violin, viola, cello, double bass, and 3 winds. And this was kind of a little bit in the divertimento style, which means it was music for pleasurable listening. And it was a huge popular success, very listenable. Everybody wanted to hear it. Now, turn back the clock to around 1800. This is about the period we're talking about, in the very beginning of that century. No smartphones, no television, no electronic anything. But the common thing that people who love music, and many of them in Vienna, had in their houses was a piano. And so the market for music by a great composer, everybody wanted to be able to feel it in their hands, and a lot of people had learned to play the piano or string instruments, other instruments. So it was very common at that time because most middle-class houses had a piano, that a composer would write a symphony, thinking specifically about Beethoven, and then either he or somebody would transcribe it for piano 4 hands, 2 pianists sitting at the piano. This was commonplace. And make no mistake about it, Beethoven, all of his life, was very much a professional musician, which means he expected to be paid for what he was doing. And he very often was supported in his life by the nobility, very anybody of his fame, people wanted to be associated with him. The symphonies were one thing, but then came the septet, which everybody loved. Very, very accessible, exciting piece. So that was Opus 20, and Opus 38, a little bit some years later, but not very far, he took his septet, the entire long piece, it's quite long, you could call it a divertimento, and transcribed it for something that could be done at home, a piano trio, violin, cello, and piano. Beethoven had in fact already written some piano trios. His opus 1, his first opus number was 3 piano trios that he worked on when he was a student of Haydn. So when that came out, it was available. I mean, that's how they made money. The publisher printed the music, people bought it, they played it. It was a good composition. They waited for the next big piece from that composer, wanted to have their hands dirtied by being directly involved in the music. So in this particular case, he actually made the transcription himself of the septet into a piano trio. Tonight we're going to hear not the entire piece, which is 35, 40 minutes long, but a subset of it, 3 movements of it, played not exactly with the piano trio, with the traditional instrument, but the violin part is going to be played by oboe. And that's for our listening pleasure, and we'll adore it. And by the way, one more thing. In that septet, there was a minuet. I'll sing it. Da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. You know, everybody knew that, and they would sing it. And Beethoven, who is a serious composer and a very adventurous composer, and always, like any great composer, comes to the next piece and starts all over again. He was kind of upset that people knew him for that minuet in the septet. But I think he got used to it because, of course, it added to his fame. But in any case, that's how we're going to start tonight, with a piece by a great composer, which is an arrangement by that very same composer for a new setting and portions of the total piece with not quite the original instrumentation. So here it is. 3 movements as a subset of his transcription, Opus 38 of the septet, one of his great popular hits. The middle group of works of our program tonight are written by the great jazz pianist Thelonious Monk. He was born in 1917 in North Carolina, but moved at a very, very early age to New York City, where he lived most of his life, except when he was touring. And he lived in a little area which is now precisely where Lincoln Center is. And there's been a lot of controversy about that over the years, because a lot of houses and properties were torn down to build the new Lincoln Center. And actually where he grew up survives, but just outside of Lincoln Center area. In that area, there was a pianist who was already interested in him as a very talented young man, and gave him a push in the direction of becoming a pianist. He started off with 2 years of very serious study from a European teacher of what we would call classical piano. He was playing works of the great masters and was particularly interested in music of Impressionism and a little bit later. But bit by bit, it became very clear that he was interested in this great new movement that was happening. called jazz. Jazz was primarily a function of black composers. He was black. And another neighbor in that area, seeing that he was going in that direction, introduced him to what came to be known as stride music, going all the way back to U.B. Blake. If you think about the performer of Scott Joplin's music, the ragtime music, U.B. Blake was a great proponent of that, and that kind of was how he began, how Monk began as a composer in that tradition. His first band that he put together, he was 16 years old. And it was a band like of high school kids. And where did they get work? Well, birthday parties, proms, whatever, anything they could get. I mean, it all sounds familiar for a lot of composers. You play where people want to hear what you wrote. And that's how he started. But he found a regular job at some place called Minton's Playhouse, where he was the regular pianist for about 5 years. And it's in that period that he got very much involved in one of the pioneers of a type of jazz called bebop. And he really began to formulate how he felt about jazz. There were a lot of people who were doing recordings, and Monk did recordings all of his life, but he was not particularly, how shall I say, easily accessible as somebody like Duke Ellington. And he took a lot of hard knocks along the way of getting a chance to be heard. I mean, all of us as young players, we want to earn a living doing what we're doing, but primarily what we're doing because music is inside of us, we want to be heard. And so there were along the way various people who recognized him for talent and pushed him in the direction of music producers of records. And he was lucky that way because he got the kind of support he needed to do that. He did touring, and one of those tours brought him to Paris. Paris was very, very interested in the American phenomenon called jazz. And a great many jazz players found their way to Paris because that was a place where they could be heard. While he was there, he met a very interesting person, and we'll come back to her. Her name was Baroness Pannonica de Königswarter. She was a member of the very famous, rich Rothschild family, and she took very much to him and supported him. Monk had married, and sometimes people speak about Pannonica as being his second wife. It was not a romantic relationship. It was just the person who was there as a helpmate through all of the trials and tribulations of the life as it went along, to the very end of when he died in New Jersey in 1982. That was really just kind of a very, very quick sketch of Monk. But I have a personal story to tell here, and that really informs our concert tonight. I've always been interested, because our school has a strong energy in the jazz area, to include that in the first Monday concerts. And I've done it over many years. And we've given honorary degrees to some of the giants. One of them, as president, I handed his diploma to him, was Miles Davis, who was a colleague of Monk's, and various other people as well. In any case, Hank Osnetsky of our faculty is somebody that I've known since I've been here, which is a very long time, and 50 years, and I turned to him and I said, I want to do something and I have a particular wish involved. And he said, what is that? I said, there is a great jazz bass player on our faculty named Cecil McBee. And he and I have stuck up a hallway friendship along the years, and is somebody that I've always dreamed of having on the First Monday series. And it's never quite worked. Hankus, can you help me do that? Hankus, in his usual roll up your sleeves and get it done, got back to me immediately, said, yes, I can do that. And I'm going to talk to Cecil, and I'm going to put a group together from stalwarts from our department and alums to play a set of music by Thelonious Monk. Now, I'm going to jump ahead by saying that in the late 1980s, when I was president of the school, Monk had died, but his son, Thelonious Jr., was very interested in education and promoting the legacy of his father, and created something called the Thelonious Monk Foundation. They formed an alliance with New England Conservatory and were active here for several years, during which time there was a Monk competition at the Kennedy Center, which led to the naming of some very, very great young artists. NEC has a real personal link, not to Monk, who this was after he died, but to the legacy of Monk. And so when Hankus said, we're going to do 3 works by Thelonious Monk, and I've got the group all together, and it's including Cecil. Now, I should tell you that Cecil was born in 1935, which means he's my senior. He will next year turn 90. He's been teaching at NEC for more than 25 years. So this is a celebration of him and Monk that brings me great personal pleasure. I turned a few days ago to Hankus to say, you know, jazz is not the area that I grew up in, but I love that music, and I need your help to explain to our audience, you, what these pieces are about. And he sent me some answers about each piece that are so perfect that I'm going to share them with you. I've not changed a word. This is exactly what Hankus wrote, and I'll look at it so I can read it. The first piece of the group is called Baloo Bolivar Baloo's R. And it was first recorded in 1956 for Riverside Records when Monk was 39 years old. And he included the original recording on his third recording for Riverside, called Brilliant Corners, widely recognized as one of the most significant releases in the history of black improvisational music. A riff-based blues in B-flat major, the title refers to Monk's patron, here we are, Countess Pannonica de Königswarter, who had troubles at the Bolivar Hotel where she lived because she would provide occasionally housing for musicians who had not much money. And the management of that hotel, remember, she was a very rich woman, and she was bringing people of color into that, and that may have been very disturbing to them, and they tried to throw her out of that. So the first piece is written with that relationship in mind. The second piece, possibly his most famous piece, is called Round Midnight, or Round About Midnight. It's a 1943 Monk composition that quickly became a jazz standard. The song has been recorded by a wide variety of artists. a version recorded by Monk's Quintet was added to the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1993. So there's an example of, in jazz, it isn't just exactly as you wrote down the notes. The new person comes along and makes a new version about it. And he would make new versions about it himself. And the third piece is Evidence. It's composed and first recorded in 1948. It's a contrafact of the popular standard Just You, Just Me by Jesse Greer and Raymond Klages. It is noteworthy for its irregular rhythms, chromatic melodic lines, and dissonant chord voicings. If you want to know more about Monk, I encourage you to find on YouTube some live performances of him playing. What's remarkable about him is he has as a persona, he is always wearing something like a cap, something like a beret, very often wearing dark glasses, plays in a very forceful style on the piano. Although with all of the technique that he picked up, he could play very fast, but sometimes it's just very punchy kind of playing. And then sometimes in the middle of playing, because he was playing with other people, and in jazz, what it is, you lay down a theme and then everybody comments on it, he would stand up and just listen to them. And then maybe sit down somewhere near the end to finish it off. So here is our recognition of Thelonious Monk, thanks to Hank Osnetsky, and honoring the impending 90th year of our great faculty member, Cecil McBee. The last piece on our program is something of a mystery. It's written by none other than Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It's called a divertimento, number 12, yet it's in a very severe key, C minor, and starts with a very solemn, troubled character. Not exactly something that you would think of as a divertimento, which, like Beethoven's piece, is meant for entertainment. And all I can say about it is he wrote it around 1772 when he was living finally in Vienna, although back and forth to Salzburg, where he was born and where his father still lived. And my think about it is that composers write music because something inside of them says, this is what I want to say. Performers, he also, but me, I'm not a composer, play music because something inside of us says, we have something we want to tell you. It's for listeners. It's always for listeners. And while we can't really know, there is no written record of how did it happen that he wrote this piece. It's kind of a mystery. And it ends after a long 4 movements in C minor with a very strong C major chord. Doesn't make it a happy piece. It has a lot of troubled things, but it has absolutely all of the hallmarks of the mature Mozart. And that's the piece we're going to hear tonight. But there's an after story to that. And that has to do with professionalism and also deadlines. In 1787, that is to say 5 years later, Mozart accepted a commission to write 3 what we know now as viola quintets. The string quartet is 2 violins, viola, cello. These quintets were 2 violins, 2 violas, and cello. And by the way, Mozart, of course, who was a very great pianist, also played violin, but the instrument he really loved, if it was chamber music to play, was viola. Right in the middle of the harmony, you might say. And he was running up against a deadline for finishing it, and he wrote in 1787, two of the greatest works from his entire lifetime, two viola quintets. The first of those pieces is the quintet in C major K515, and the second was the quintet in G minor 516. And so it happened that the Serenade for Eight Winds, which we're hearing tonight, is in four movements like a standard chamber music piece. And so he was thinking, he promised the commissioner that he would supply three quintets. And I guess he was running out of time. So he looked back on his own music and repurposed the octet for viola quintet. And he gave it, it has one of two Koerschel numbers. That's the Koerschel catalog, is something that was put together later on by a musicologist in Germany that's not Mozart himself. Mozart kept kind of a catalog of his own pieces. So the piece is known either as K406, which is kind of when it was published, but also as K516B, 516 being the G minor quintet. What's interesting about it, and I think just amazing, is that if the players of our wind octet hear the quintet, they're not going to say, well, we got there first. And if the players of the string quintet say, well, okay, there's also a piece of this in the form for eight wind players, neither group will consider that they have the superior piece, because these are two absolute manuscripts, and that Mozart, this incredible composer in his mature period, could do seemingly almost anything. Just whatever he touched came out perfectly. Well, you're hearing it tonight to finish our fall series in the octet version.